Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Dobré ráno. It's a great joy that we can be here together with my colleague from Israel for this special conference. And it's also a privilege to be able to start the conference with our contributions, which will be devoted to a subject that some of you might find strange or surprising. After all, the conference and the whole subject of Lidice is devoted to events of World War II, something that happened 80 years ago, while I and my colleague are going to reflect on a much more recent experience from Israel. But just as the director already said in his opening speech, we believe that it is very relevant to our world today. Mr. Niv Higgins comes from Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the most devastated villages near the Gaza border. We Are All Be'eri has become a slogan in Israel, making Be'eri a symbol of the atrocities. And I was there in Israel on October 7th, so I saw all the events from close. And when it became apparent what happened in Be'eri, I immediately thought about Lidice, because it has been a household name for Czechs and even beyond the Czech Republic. And so this is how the idea of connecting and comparing Lidice and the fate of Be'eri came about. Mr. Higgins will share his personal experience from October 7, as well as the efforts of rebuilding and restoring that are underway now. And I will attempt, in my introductory word, to show that there is a strong connection between the events of World War II and the events that led to the massacre of October 7. And in my opinion, it's worth comparing and thinking about the common factors that lead to atrocities where innocent civilians suffer again and again. As it has been already aptly mentioned, the slogan "Never Again" came after World War II, after the horrors of the war were uncovered. And yet, we have seen again and again many instances of cruelty and barbaric attacks on civilians in many places of the world. The Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, the Srebrenica massacre have been officially recognized as cases of genocide under the UN Genocide Convention. Now, that convention was adopted specifically to prevent the atrocities of the Holocaust from repeating themselves. This man, his name is Raphael Lemkin, and he first used the very word genocide to describe the scale of atrocities in World War II perpetrated against the Jews and others by the Nazis. As you will hear from my colleague, the massacre perpetrated by Hamas on 7 October 2023 exhibits clear signs of attempted genocide. This is not the space to deal with all the complexities of more than 100 years of the Israeli-Arab conflict. But I want to focus on one particular aspect which links that to Nazi ideology. The Hamas Charter, which was published in 1988, is a central document of this terrorist organization, and it clearly states as its goal the destruction of the State of Israel. It contains a mixture of Islamic arguments derived from the extreme interpretation of Islam by the Muslim Brotherhood, but it also exhibits typical European anti-Semitism, as expressed in the Nazi ideology and, for instance, in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a known Tsarist forgery accusing the Jews of conspiracy to control the world. Let me give you a few quotes from that document, the Hamas Charter. The Jews, by means of their money, have taken over the international communications, media, the news agencies, newspapers, publishing houses, broadcasting stations, etc. They were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most of the revolutions we have heard about. They used their money to found secret organizations and scattered them all over the globe to destroy other societies and realize the interest of Zionism. This is an exact quote from Article 22 of the Hamas Charter. And as you will notice, there are some very strange elements, strange to Arab and Islamic thinking. The mention of the French and Russian revolutions that would have no interest in the minds of Arab people. So how did they get there? That's a very strange mixture. And I alluded already to the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now it is also explicitly mentioned in the Hamas Charter in Article 32. The Zionist plan has no limit. Their plan appears in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and their present behavior is the best proof of what we are saying. In other words, Hamas considered this Tsarist forgery an example of European anti-Semitism to be a valid source by which they guide their actions. So what is really unique here is this combination of this Islamic teaching with this European Nazi-like anti-Semitism. On the Muslim side, there is a very clear use of certain rather obscure parts of not only the Quran itself, but also the so-called hadiths. Hadiths are oral stories that accompany the written Quran. And one of the most famous one that is used over and over by Hamas and other groups has this special story that I will quote. The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree would say, "Muslim, the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." This has been chanted on the streets. This has been promoted by Hamas. This is part of their very charter, of their very founding document. And this one conveys a typical Islamic view of the Jew as one who is weak, who is hiding, who is in fear. And now, if you compare it to the previous expressions where the Jew is portrayed as the almighty conspiring to control the world, to control the media, it doesn't seem logical, does it? Is the Jew then strong or weak? But that paradox should not surprise us, because that is the very nature of anti-Semitism. It can combine totally unrelated and illogical concepts that are united by the hatred of the Jews. As people say, the hatred of Jews, the anti-Semitism, sometimes makes strange bedfellows. So this is the combination of selected portions of Islamic teaching with Nazi-like ideology. I think about the character of anti-Semitism, one of the best quotes is this one attributed to George Orwell. Anti-Semitism is the ability to believe stories which cannot be true. And that is what we have in the case of Hamas as well. I also need to underline that that radical interpretation of Islam is certainly not the only one. First of all, historically, when Jews lived under Muslim domination, for instance, in the Ottoman Empire, they were better off than Jews who lived under Christian domination in the Middle Ages. For instance, in Turkey, in the Ottoman rule, there have never been pogroms like we know them from Russia or Western Europe. The Jews were not forced to live in ghettos. They even could occupy high positions in society. All that under the rule of Islam. So there are different interpretations which will have different consequences for the life of Jews. But how could these extreme views get combined with European-style anti-Semitism? It starts with the Muslim Brotherhood that was founded in Egypt in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna. And its main vision has been the establishment of a pan-Islamic caliphate with Sharia rule. And it is commonly interpreted as the reaction to the demise of Islam by radical Muslims. Remember, in 1918, at the end of World War I, the last Islamic caliphate with the seat in Istanbul was defeated. Turkey was defeated. They had to release the territories they held, and Turkey became a secular republic. No more rule of Islam. And that was the first time, actually, since the founding of Islam. And so this, combined with the victory of the Allies, with technological, let's say, success of the Western culture, that all meant the degradation of Islam. And in some minds, the idea came to go back to roots. And this is where we can see the roots of the Muslim Brotherhoods, the reaction to the modern times. Now, it was 1920s, and remember what was going on in Europe? Hitler was slowly going on the way to gain power, and the Nazi Party had been already established. Now, elements of European anti-Semitism had already been known to Egypt, where the Muslim Brotherhood was started. The anti-Semitic book by August Rohling, Der Talmud Jude, was published in Arabic in Cairo already in 1899. And the Protocols of the Elders of Zion were published in Arabic in 1918. And in the 20s, when the Brotherhood was founded in Egypt, Hitler was already gaining power in Germany, and Nazi agents were also in Egypt. For instance, Hitler's deputy Rudolf Hess was born in Alexandria. His brother Alfred Hess started building an Egyptian branch of the NSDAP, the Nazi Party, in Egypt in 1926. And the Nazis in that time soon discovered that Arabs who opposed Jewish presence in the Holy Land would make good allies. As the Nazi foreign minister said in 1937, and I quote, "The Jewish question is one of the most important problems of German foreign policy, and therefore there is significant German interest in the development in Palestine." There were already riots by Arabs against the Jewish presence in the Holy Land, and Germany, which made anti-Semitism, the liquidation of Jews, the top policy, they understood that the Arabs could be used for their goals. Close cooperation between the Nazis and the Muslim Brotherhood soon developed. We are still in the 20s. The British Secret Service discovered that the Muslim Brothers received money from the Nazis. Nazi representatives took part in Muslim Brotherhood conferences and such. Enter another important person who became a Nazi ally. His name was Hajj Amin al-Husseini. This is the man to the left on the picture. Husseini, in case you wouldn't recognize. In 1921, he was appointed by the British as the chief mufti of Jerusalem. And he was the first Arab leader who mobilized Arab masses in terror against the Jewish population in Mandatory Palestine. And the Nazis saw an opportunity to collaboration because of his hatred of Jews. This man, Amin al-Husseini, managed to transform the territorial conflict in British Mandate into a religious one. Instead of compromise and pragmatism, like dividing the land between the Jews and the Arabs, he preached fighting to life and death. And he intimidated other Arabs who were more inclined to coexistence with Jews. When the British tried to arrest and deport him for his role in instigating Arab riots, he escaped and later moved to Berlin, where he was with Hitler during the war. Now, this is one of the history's what if. What if the British would have succeeded in deporting Amin al-Husseini? maybe the whole Arab-Israeli conflict would develop in a very different way. Now, how could the Nazis, when they determined that they could use the Arab masses to instigate hatred against Jews, how could they possibly do it? Germany is far away from the Middle East. But in the 20s, a new medium came to life, the radio. Most Arabs in the Middle East then were illiterate, but listening to radio broadcasting became a very efficient way of disseminating propaganda. People would often gather on streets or in cafes to listen together to the broadcast. And Amin al-Husseini realized the potential of radio for his purpose of spreading hate against Jews. And he convinced Hitler to start broadcasting in Arabic to the Middle East. The official program, under the direction of the propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, started in Arabic in April 1939. The same time when the Nazis occupied the rest of the Czech lands. It was broadcasting from Zesen, a town near Berlin, and it functioned uninterrupted throughout the war until 1945, 6 years of broadcast. A fascinating discovery was made recently, which makes it possible to know something about the content of the broadcast. Besides copies of manuscripts from 8 January 1940 until 31st August 1941, which are available in German state archives in Berlin, discovered were translations of stenographic memos of the content of Radio Zesen broadcasting, ordered by American ambassador to Egypt, Alexander Kirk. Thanks to him, we have a complete collection of speeches up to February 1945. They can be found in US National Archive and were first reported by historian Jeffrey Hurt in his study Nazi Propaganda for the Arab World. That's the book on the left. And I also refer to another book by German historian Matthias Künzel, Nazis und der Nahe Osten, on the right. For historians, I really recommend to read those books. Now, the content of Nazi broadcasting in Arabic is unique in that it combines, again, classical Nazi anti-Jewish propaganda with selected Islamic documents. And again, here we have the paradox, because the Nazis were racist, and Arabs are certainly not an Aryan race. So even the Nazis at first had their doubts if they should really ally themselves with an Arab race. But it seems that it was the success of Amin al-Husseini's mobilization against Jews that made the Nazis change their mind against strange bedfellows between the racist Nazis and the Arab masses. Therefore, Islam became the main focus in the Arabic broadcasting from Berlin. Each broadcast started with a recitation from the Quran. Much time was devoted to Muslim feast. And since the arrival of Amin al-Husseini in Berlin in November 1941, virulent anti-Semitism grew steadily in the broadcast. 6 years of radio broadcasts spread the hatred of Jews to the Arab masses in a way that had not existed before. Again, the Nazis used their own propaganda, but put on it a seemingly Islamic veneer to make it more relevant, more attractive to the Arab masses. So we have here a direct link between Nazi propaganda and the radical Islamic anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, this is not only a matter of the past. This is, as I showed, clearly reflected in the Charter of Hamas. And this was the driving force behind the massacre of October 7 and many other atrocities against the Jews. Now, the important point is that this complete rejection of Jewish presence in the Middle East and the need to fight for complete victory predates the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. It was already there in the 1920s and 30s. Therefore, all allegations that it is the Israeli occupation that is the cause of the riots is completely false. As a proof of the ongoing influence of Nazi propaganda in the Arab world is the fact that Nazi books are on the top bestseller list until today. Hitler is still seen as a hero. Mein Kampf is a popular book in Arabic. And the next title is also the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, Arabic version printed in Syria about 5 years ago. So we can say that the Middle East is the only region in the world where Nazi ideology is not discredited but celebrated. And that is the fertile ground from which atrocities like those perpetrated on October 7 grew. Now, history of the Holocaust teaches us that systematic indoctrination of the population, demonization of Jews in the public, can influence whole society. If Hitler's propaganda was able to sway the cultured German nation, so can this propaganda change the attitude towards Jews in the Arab world. And we have many proofs today. School books for the Palestinian Authority, for instance, portray Jews as deprived individuals. There's no teaching of peace or coexistence. There's no space for the State of Israel in school maps. The slogans "From the river to the sea" refers to the complete ethnic cleansing of Jews from the land of Israel. And history also teaches us that there's a significant role which can be played by the so-called silent majority. And unfortunately, oftentimes, it remains silent. When we speak about the war or the Holocaust, we usually distinguish between the perpetrators, they are clear, the victims, that's also clear, but then there is this middle ground. Those people who belong to neither group, and they were called the bystanders. Mostly, they remained passive. And that means that they gave the perpetrators free rein. As Edmund Burke once said, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And as mentioned at the beginning, we live, unfortunately, at a time when never again is very relevant again. Masses of violent anti-Jewish demonstrations plague Western cities. Demonizing the Jewish state is becoming normal. And we should not think that this problem relates to Jews or Israel only. As the late Chief Rabbi of Great Britain, Jonathan Sacks, put it, the hatred that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. And I believe that the fate of Lidice is a very powerful case in point. So the question is clear. Are we going to remain bystanders again? And I would like to finish on an optimistic note. There are examples from the history of World War II that show that it is possible not to remain silent. It is possible to turn the tide. In Bulgaria, the whole nation stood up against the Nazi plan to round up the Jews, and as a result, over 48,000 Bulgarian Jews were saved. They were never deported. This man on the left is Dmitry Peshev, who has been recognized as one of the righteous from the nations by Yad Vashem. In Albania, Muslim neighbors welcomed and hid Jews fleeing from the surrounding countries, so that at the end of the war, more Jews lived in Albania than at its beginning. Again, a unique expression of solidarity, recognized again by Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Memorial. And finally, in Denmark, that's on the right, the king put on the Star of David. The citizens helped rescue their Jewish neighbors, and so almost all Danish Jews were thus rescued. So it is possible to stand against the current. May we take the lesson seriously and cooperate with all people of goodwill in standing firmly against hate today. Thank you for your attention.